Mark stood on the balcony of the spaceport, gazing out at the bright stars that lit up the vastness of space. The soft hum of the station's engines echoed around him. But his mind wasn't on the technology or the ship he had just arrived on. Instead, his thoughts wandered to the planet below. The planet wasn't like Earth. It was a peaceful world filled with bright blue skies and lush green landscapes. It wasn't the planet that Mark had come here for, it was the people. Had been invited to a peace conference between several alien civilizations. Mark was one of the few humans chosen to represent his planet in this important meeting. As he walked through the station, heading for the main hall, Mark couldn't help but feel out of place. He'd always been a diplomat, but this was his first time in a setting where he wasn't just negotiating with humans. The aliens he would meet here were so different from him in many ways. Their cultures, their technology, and even their way of thinking were all foreign to him. When he entered the main hall, Mark saw a sea of different species gathered around, talking and laughing, their voices a mix of strange languages. Person caught his eye immediately. She was standing by the window looking out at the planet below. She was tall, with smooth green skin and eyes that sparkled like stars. Her long silver hair flowed down her back, and her posture was both elegant and strong. Mark couldn't stop staring at her, captivated by the beauty and strength she radiated. She noticed him staring and smiled softly, as if she had been expecting him. Mark felt his heart skip a beat. He hadn't even realized he was walking toward her until he was standing right beside her. "Hello," Mark said, his voice a little unsure. "I'm Mark. It's nice to meet you." The alien woman turned to him, her eyes studying him for a moment before she spoke. "I am Lyra," she said, her voice calm and musical. "It's good to meet you, Mark." Her accent was soft but clear, and Mark was surprised at how easily he could understand her. The conference had translators, but it felt more personal. "This way. You're one of the humans, I assume?" Lyra asked, a curious glint in her eyes. Mark chuckled nervously. "Yes, I am. One of the few humans here. We're not as numerous as you might think." Lyra nodded, her eyes gleaming with interest. "Your species fascinates me. You're so different from us, yet we share much in common." Mark raised an eyebrow. "Really? I thought our cultures were completely different." "Oh, they are," Lyra replied. "But at our core, we are all creatures of the same universe, bound by the same desire for understanding. You will see in time." They spoke for a while longer, exchanging stories about their worlds and their people. Mark learned that Lyra was not just a diplomat like him, but a leader of her people. She was intelligent, powerful, and graceful in ways that made Mark admire her more with each passing moment. The conversation flowed effortlessly, and he found himself laughing and enjoying her company more than he had with anyone in a long time. As the night wore on, they walked through the station together, talking about everything from the stars to their hopes for the future. Lyra seemed to understand him in a way no one else had. There was a connection, a bond, that felt like it had always been there. At one point, as they stopped to look out at the stars once more, Mark turned to her with a grin. "You know, I think I might just fall in love with this place." Lyra smiled back, her eyes twinkling. "Perhaps," she said, "but I think I might have a different plan." Mark looked at her, confused for a moment. "What do you mean?" Lyra took a deep breath before speaking again, her voice serious but filled with warmth. "Mark, I know this is sudden, but I have been thinking about something, you and I. We could be more than just diplomats, more than just allies. I believe that, if you are willing, we could join our worlds in a way that no one else has ever done." Mark blinked, surprised by her words. He wasn't sure if she was speaking metaphorically or something more serious. "Are you saying?" Lyra interrupted him, her voice soft and full of meaning. "Yes, we could marry. 5 years from now, we will be together, not just as representatives of our people, but as something more." Mark's heart raced. He had only known her for a short time, but the connection was real. He felt it deep inside. But still, it was such a strange request. 5 years, he asked, his voice faltering. "Yes," Lyra replied with a nod. "In 5 years, I will return to you. If you are ready, we will marry." Mark didn't know what to say. He looked into her eyes, seeing nothing but sincerity. There was no joke here, no trick. She was serious. "All right," Mark said finally, laughing a little, though his voice was shaky. 5 years, I promise." Lyra smiled, her eyes glowing with quiet confidence. "I will hold you to that promise, Mark, no matter where we are, no matter what happens." As the night ended, Mark felt a strange sense of certainty. He didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear: Lyra would return, and their lives would change forever. Mark woke up early the next morning, his mind still racing from the night before. Lyra's words echoed in his head, and he couldn't help but wonder if he had made a mistake. 5 years. 5 years was a long time, and Mark had no idea what his life would be like then. But Lyra was serious, and there was something about her that made him feel like he couldn't back out. He stood by the window of his hotel room, looking out at the alien landscape. The planet was peaceful, with rolling hills and distant mountains that touched the sky. It was a beautiful sight, but it didn't feel like home. Mark had always thought of Earth as his one and only home, but the more he learned about these other worlds, the more he realized how much he was missing: the peace. Conference was scheduled to start later that day, but Mark found it hard to focus. His thoughts kept drifting back to Lyra. She had invited him to visit her planet once the conference was over, but he wasn't sure if he was ready for that. He wasn't sure if he was ready for any of this. Mark had always been good at his job. As a diplomat, he had traveled to many planets, met many different species, and worked hard to keep peace between them all. But none of that had ever been as complicated as what was happening now. He had promised Lyra something big, something life-changing, and that scared him. As the day went on, Mark tried his best to push his worries aside. He joined the other diplomats and leaders at the conference, discussing trade agreements, security, and all the things that were supposed to matter. But nothing seemed important anymore. Every time he glanced around the room, he found himself searching for Lyra's familiar face, wondering if she was thinking about him too. The conference lasted for several days, and during that time, Mark spent more and more time with Lyra. They attended meetings together, explored the station, and shared quiet moments under the stars. Mark's feelings for her grew stronger with each passing day. But there was something else happening too. He began to see just how different their lives were. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was too far out of his depth. One evening, after a long day of talks, Mark and Lyra sat outside on a balcony. Overlooking the planet, stars were bright and close, the air cool and fresh. Mark took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm of thoughts in his mind. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began, his voice hesitant. 5 years? It's a long time. What if things change? What if we change? Lyra looked at him, her silver hair glowing softly in the light of the stars. She didn't seem worried. Instead, she just smiled, a calm and confident smile that made Mark feel like everything was going to be all right. "Things will change, Mark," she said gently. "That's part of life. We can't stop it, but we can choose how we face it. The promise I made to you, it's not just about waiting for 5 years. It's about what we do in that time. We will grow, we will learn, and we will build it. Future together. No matter where we are, no matter how far apart we may seem, I will always keep my word." Mark felt a warmth spread through him as he listened to her words. There was something about the way she spoke, something in the way she believed in him, that made him feel like maybe this could work. He had never felt so connected to someone before. The thought of losing that connection scared him. "I want to believe that," Mark admitted, looking down at his hands. "But what if I'm not ready? What if I can't give you what you need?" Lyra reached out and placed her hand on his, her touch gentle but firm. "You don't have to be perfect, Mark. No one is. We just have to be willing to try." Mark looked up at her, his heart pounding in his chest. She was right. He didn't have to be perfect. He just had to be there to be willing to try. For the first time in a long time, felt like he was ready to try. "I'm not sure what the next 5 years will bring," Mark said, his voice steady, "but I want to face them with you." Lyra's smile widened, and she nodded. "Yes. All I need to hear." From that moment on, Mark knew that he had made the right choice. He wasn't sure what the future held, but he was ready to face it with Lyra by his side. Over the next few days, they talked more about what would come after the conference. Mark agreed to visit her home planet once the peace talks were over, and they made plans to spend time together, learning about each other's worlds. The conference came to a close, and Mark was ready to return to Earth. He had a lot to think about, but he felt more at peace with himself than he had in a long time. The uncertainty of the future no longer felt so overwhelming. He had a promise to keep, and that promise was all that mattered now. As Mark boarded the ship back to Earth, he couldn't help but smile. He had no idea what the next 5 years would bring. But he knew one thing for sure. Lyra was worth the wait. 5 years passed faster than Mark had expected. Life on Earth had continued, as it always did. Work, meetings, and endless negotiations filled his days, but Lyra was never far from his thoughts. Every now and then, he would pause, looking out at the stars, wondering if she was thinking of him too. He often smiled at the memory of their last conversation, of the promise they had made under those stars. Mark had kept his word. He stayed busy, building a reputation as one of the top diplomats in the galaxy. At the thought of Lyra stayed with him, reminding him that 5 years wasn't as long as it seemed. He knew deep down that it would be impossible to forget her. And so, when the day finally arrived, Mark found himself standing on the same balcony at the spaceport, staring out at the stars. It was exactly 5 years since they had last met. The promise he had made to Lyra felt heavier today than ever before. Had spent months preparing, not just in his work, but in his heart. Was he really ready for what was to come? Suddenly, his communicator buzzed. Glanced at the screen, his breath catching in his throat. It was a message from Lyra. "I've arrived, Mark. I'm waiting for you." A wave of emotion washed over him. It felt like a dream. He had kept his promise, but he hadn't expected her to be so punctual. It was as if she had been living those 5 years just as intensely as he had.
"Not wasting a moment."
Mark quickly made his way to the shuttle bay, his heart racing. The door slid open. And there she was, Lyra, standing at the foot of the platform, looking every bit as graceful and powerful as he remembered. Her long silver hair gleamed in the light, and her green skin seemed to shimmer like the planet they had met on. But now there was something different about her. There was a strength in her gaze, a calm confidence that came from years of leadership and preparation. She had changed. And Mark knew that the Lyra who had left 5 years ago was not the same one who stood before him now. She smiled when she saw him. And for a moment, everything else faded. All the years, all the distance, disappeared in that instant. "Mark," she said softly, her voice full of warmth and quiet power. "I told you I would return, and here I am." Mark took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. He had thought about this moment countless times over the years, but nothing had prepared him for the reality of standing face to face with her again. "You kept your word," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "I never doubted you, Lyra." She laughed, a soft, melodic sound that made Mark's heart skip. "I knew you wouldn't, but Mark, I have not come back to just keep a promise. I have come to make sure we do what we promised together." Mark's heart pounded in his chest. "Do you mean?" Lyra stepped closer to him, her eyes locking with his. "I have spent these 5 years preparing for us. I have worked to bring our people closer, to build something that will allow us to unite our worlds. But it is not just politics, Mark. This is about us, about what we can be together. You and I have the power to create a future where both of our worlds can thrive." Mark was stunned by her words. He had known Lyra was important, but hearing her speak so passionately about their future made everything real. The weight of their promise now seemed like something that could change not just their lives, but the galaxy itself. "You've done all this, ... for us?" Mark asked, his voice filled with awe. Lyra nodded, her gaze softening. "For us. And for a future where our people can live in harmony. But it will only work if you're with me, Mark. If you're ready to stand by my side." The words hit him like a wave. He had never imagined that their simple promise would lead to something so grand. Yet here it was, standing in front of him. Mark had always thought of himself as a diplomat, but this was beyond diplomacy. This was love, ambition, and the future of two worlds that had never known such unity. "I'm ready," Mark said, his voice firm and clear. "I've always been ready, Lyra." A look of relief washed over her face, and she smiled brighter than Mark had ever seen. "Then let's begin." For the next few days, Mark and Lyra spent time together, talking about everything that had happened over the past 5 years. Mark learned about the struggles Lyra had faced, the challenges she had overcome, and the leaders she had convinced. To join their cause, she had worked tirelessly, not just for the two of them, but for the peace they both dreamed of. They spent evenings under the stars, revisiting their old conversations and making new ones. Mark found that Lyra's presence, her strength and determination inspired him in ways he hadn't imagined. She wasn't just a leader. She was someone who believed in the power of love, the kind of love that could change the world. On the final night before Mark had to return to Earth, Lyra took him to the edge of the city, where the view of the stars was breathtaking. They stood side by side, watching the glowing lights of distant planets as they slowly moved across the sky. "Mark," Lyra said, her voice soft, "I know the road ahead will not always be easy. There will be challenges, and we will face opposition. But together, we can make it work." Mark took her hand in his, feeling the warmth of her touch. "I believe in us, Lyra, and I believe in the future we can build." Together, they watched the stars, knowing that their journey had only just begun. Mark woke up early the next morning, feeling the weight of the promise he had made 5 years ago. Lyra had returned, and now everything seemed to be changing faster than he had imagined. The life he had known was slipping away, replaced by the reality of what they had decided to build together. The days since Lyra's arrival had been filled with discussions about the future. They spent their time planning, making decisions about how they could bring their worlds together, how they could unite their people. It was a massive task, but Mark could see how determined Lyra was. Her strength and dedication were unlike anything he had ever seen. He admired her more each day, but as their time together grew, so did the doubts that lingered in his mind. He walked through the city with Lyra, taking in the beauty of her world. The alien city was unlike anything Mark had ever imagined. Tall, gleaming towers stretched toward the sky, their surfaces shimmering with light. The streets were filled with people from many different species, each one contributing to the rich, vibrant culture of the planet. Everywhere he looked, there was harmony. It seemed like the perfect place where peace and progress had been made. Yet there was still a part of him that couldn't shake the fear of what was to come. Lyra noticed his distant expression and stopped walking. She turned to face him, her green eyes searching his face for answers. "Mark, what's wrong?" she asked gently. "You've been quiet all day." Mark hesitated. How could he explain his worries? How could he voice the fear that had been growing inside him? He'd promised her, but now that she was here, the reality of their commitment felt much more daunting. "I'm not sure if I'm ready for all of this," Mark admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've always been a diplomat, but this is something else. We're talking about bringing two worlds together. It's more than I ever imagined." Lyra took a deep breath, her expression softening. She reached out and placed a hand on his arm, her touch warm and reassuring. "I understand, Mark. This is not an easy task. But remember, you're not doing this alone. We're in this together. Our people need us, but more than that, we need each other. And I know that we are strong enough to make it work." Mark looked into her eyes, seeing the certainty in her gaze. Her confidence gave him a sense of peace. But there was still a part of him that felt uncertain. "What if we fail?" he asked, his voice filled with worry. "What if we can't bring our worlds together? What if everything falls apart?" Lyra smiled softly and shook her head. "Failure is not the end, Mark. It's just a step toward learning, toward improving. If we fail, we try again. We never give up. But we won't fail, because we have something stronger than fear. Our belief in each other, our belief in the future." Mark felt the weight in his chest lighten as he listened to her words. Lyra was right. He had never faced anything like this before, but he had faced challenges in the past, and he had always found a way through them. With Lyra by his side, maybe this challenge wasn't so impossible after all. They continued their walk through the city. The streets were alive with activity, children playing, merchants selling goods, and groups of people gathering in the parks to talk and relax. It was a beautiful sight, and for the first time since arriving, Mark felt a sense of belonging. He had been part of something important before, but this was different. This wasn't just about peace agreements and trade deals. This was about uniting two completely different worlds, about making a future where both sides could thrive together. The day passed quickly, and soon it was evening. Mark and Lyra found themselves sitting on the edge of a large terrace, overlooking the city below. The sky had turned a deep purple, and the stars were beginning to shine through the fading light. The air was cool, and the gentle breeze carried the scent of alien flowers, something Mark had never experienced before. Lyra turned to him, her face serious but warm. "Mark, I know this isn't easy for you. I know you're used to handling things with your mind, with words and negotiations. But this is different. This is about hearts, about trust, and I trust you." Mark looked at her, feeling a surge of emotion in his chest. He had never heard someone speak to him like that before. With such sincerity, such confidence in him, it made him feel stronger, more capable than he had ever felt in his life. "I trust you too, Lyra," Mark said quietly. "I don't know what the future holds, but I know I want to face it with you." Lyra smiled and reached out to take his hand. "Then we will face it together." They sat in silence for a while, watching the city below. Mark thought about how much had changed in the last 5 years, how much had changed in the last few days. He had been uncertain, afraid of the unknown, but now he felt like he was ready. Lyra had given him the strength he needed to move forward. Together, they could build something great, something lasting. "Tomorrow, we begin," Lyra said, breaking the silence. "Tomorrow, we start working toward the future." Mark nodded. "Tomorrow we begin." As the stars above them grew brighter, Mark realized that his life had changed forever. It wasn't just about a promise anymore. It was about love, trust, and the future they would create together. The days that followed Mark's conversation with Lyra were filled with preparation. They spent their time in the alien city, meeting with leaders from both worlds and discussing the future. Lyra's people were strong, proud, and intelligent, but they had lived in isolation for many years. Now they were ready to open their doors and embrace a new future. But there were still many who questioned whether it was the right choice. Mark had always known that peace talks could be complicated. But this was different. It wasn't just about trade agreements or territory, it was about uniting two very different cultures and people. He understood the stakes, and he knew that failure wasn't an option. He couldn't let Lyra down. She had trusted him with so much already, and he couldn't let fear or uncertainty stop him from helping her. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Mark found himself alone with Lyra in a quiet corner of the city. The stars above them seemed brighter than ever, and the air was cool and refreshing. They sat on a bench, looking out at the horizon. "Mark," Lyra began, her voice serious, "I know this isn't easy. I can see the doubt in your eyes. I know that bringing our worlds together is not going to be simple. There will be challenges, and not everyone will accept what we're trying to do." Mark turned to face her, his heart heavy. "I know, Lyra, but I can't help but wonder, what if we fail? Why? What if the people don't want to change? What if the leaders don't trust us?" Lyra smiled softly, her eyes filled with understanding. "Change is hard, Mark. It always has been. That doesn't mean it's impossible. You and I have already done something that no one thought was possible. We've kept our promise. We've come this far. And now, it's time to show everyone that we can do more." Mark felt a sense of peace wash over him. Lyra was right. They had already taken the first step, and they had made it this far together. But the pressure of what was to come still weighed on him. What if the people rejected them? What if everything they had worked for fell apart? "We've already built something strong, something real," Lyra continued. "We've shown them that two worlds can come together, not out of fear or necessity, but out of love and trust. Our people are watching us, Mark. They're waiting to see what we will do next. Mark nodded slowly. But what if the timing isn't right? What if the leaders can't see what we see? What if they don't believe that we can make this work? Then we show them, Lyra said with quiet confidence. We show them by continuing to believe in each other. We show them by never giving up, no matter what. Mark looked at her, his heart swelling with pride. Her strength was inspiring. He had always admired her, but now he realized just how much he depended on her. She was the anchor that kept him steady, even when the storms of doubt threatened to overwhelm him. I'm with you, Lyra, Mark said, his voice filled with determination. I may not have all the answers, but I'll stand by you. We'll face this together. Lyra's eyes softened, and she reached out to take his hand. That's all I need, Mark. Together, we can do anything. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Meetings with leaders, discussions about policy, and planning for the future took up every moment. But through it all, Mark and Lyra remained focused on their goal, to bring their people together. They worked tirelessly, traveling to different regions, meeting with both human and alien representatives. They knew that every step they took would bring them closer to their dream. But it was also a step into the unknown. One afternoon, as they walked through a peaceful garden filled with alien flowers, Mark found himself thinking about the future. It felt surreal to think that just 5 years ago, he had made a promise to Lyra, and now that promise was becoming a reality. But it was more than just a promise. It was a movement that could change the galaxy. We're making progress, Mark said, his voice filled with hope. I can feel it. The people are starting to see that we can make this work. Lyra smiled, her eyes lighting up with pride. Yes, we are. But there is still much to do. This isn't just about words, it's about action. We must prove to them that we are serious, that we are ready to lead together. Mark nodded. He knew what she meant. Words could only do so much. Now, it was time for them to show their people that they were more than just diplomats. They were partners, working toward a common goal. They had a vision, and together, they would make it a reality. As the days passed, the momentum continued. To build, more and more leaders began to join their cause, and the opposition that had once seemed so powerful began to fade. There were still challenges, still moments of doubt, but with each step forward, Mark and Lyra grew stronger. Their bond deepened, and so did their resolve to create a future where both their people could live in peace. One evening, after a particularly long meeting, Mark and Lyra stood on a balcony, looking out at the stars. The city below them was quiet, but Mark could feel the excitement in the air. They were on the brink of something extraordinary, and for the first time in a long while, felt at peace with the path they had chosen. We've done it, Lyra, Mark said quietly, his voice full of pride. We've brought our worlds together. Lyra turned to him, her smile as radiant as the stars. No, Mark, we've just begun. This is only the beginning. And with that, Mark knew that the road ahead would not always be easy, but as long. As they were together, nothing could stop them. The days had turned into weeks, and the work that Mark and Lyra had set in motion continued to grow. Their vision of uniting their people seemed closer than ever. They had faced challenges, but with each step, they had gained more support. The leaders who had once been hesitant were now beginning to see the potential in their partnership. With success also came new pressures. Stakes had never been higher. Mark sat in his quarters late one night, looking over the reports that filled his desk. He had spent hours reviewing the latest updates from both the human and alien delegations. There had been a breakthrough in negotiations, and the leaders from Lyra's world had agreed to a new trade deal. It was a victory, but it was only a small part of the larger goal. They still had a long way to go before they could fully unite. Their two worlds, he rubbed his eyes, feeling the weight of the responsibility pressing on him. His thoughts drifted back to their first meeting, to the promise he had made to Lyra 5 years ago. He never could have imagined the challenges they would face, or the depth of what their union would come to mean. He had known that it would change their lives, but he hadn't fully understood how much it would change him. A soft knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. He glanced up and saw Lyra standing in the doorway, her green eyes filled with a quiet understanding. "Am I disturbing you?" she asked, her voice as calm as ever. Mark smiled and shook his head. "No, not at all." "Come in," Lyra stepped inside and sat beside him, her presence always offering him a sense of peace. She had a way of calming his mind, of reminding him that they were in this together. Her unwavering belief in their mission gave him strength when his own doubts crept in. "We've made a lot of progress," Lyra said, looking at the reports spread across the table. "But I can see that you're still troubled." Mark let out a deep sigh. "It's just, there's so much to consider. We've been so focused on what we can accomplish, but now it feels like the pressure is building. There are still so many people who are against what we're doing, and I worry that it won't be enough." Lyra reached out and placed her hand on his. "Mark, I understand, but look how far we've come. We've built trust between our people. We've brought them together in a way that no one thought possible. We are changing the future, and that is not an easy task. But I believe in us. I believe in you." Mark looked at her, her confidence giving him a sense of calm he hadn't felt all day. "I don't know how you do it," he said quietly. "You make it look so easy." Lyra smiled softly. "It's not easy, but it's worth it, and you make it easier than you think. We're in this together. Everything we've done so far has been because of both of us, and everything we'll do in the future will be the same." Her words settled in Mark's heart, and for the first time in days, the pressure didn't feel so heavy. They had come so far because of their shared vision, their shared commitment to something greater than themselves. They weren't just making decisions for their own people. They were making decisions that would affect the future of two worlds. "I just don't want to fail you," Mark admitted, his voice quiet. Lyra's gaze softened. "You won't fail me. You already have shown me more than I ever thought possible. You've kept your promise, Mark. That's what matters." Mark felt a wave of relief wash over him. The fear he had been carrying for so long seemed to lift, replaced by the steady confidence he had once seen in Lyra. He realized then that it wasn't about avoiding failure. It was about continuing to move forward, no matter the obstacles. "We'll face whatever comes together," Mark said, his voice steady. Lyra smiled. "Exactly." The next few days were filled with more meetings and discussions. Mark and Lyra worked tirelessly, meeting with delegations from both sides, preparing the groundwork for the official unification of their people. It was slow, difficult work, but they had learned to navigate the complex negotiations with patience and determination. One evening, after a particularly long day of talks, Mark and Lyra found themselves standing on the balcony of the building that overlooked the alien city. The stars were bright, and the air was cool. It felt like a perfect moment to pause and reflect, even if just for a little while. "We're close now," Mark said, looking out at the city below. "I can feel it." Lyra nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "We are, but we must remember, this is just the beginning. Our people will need time to adjust, to learn how to live together. There will be challenges ahead, and we must be ready to face them." Mark turned to face her, a soft smile on his lips. "We'll face them, just like we faced everything else." "Together?" Lyra's gaze softened, and she stepped closer to him. "I don't know what the future holds, but I know that with you, I can face it." Mark took her hand in his, feeling the warmth of her touch. "We'll make it work, Lyra, I promise." They stood there for a moment, silently watching the stars. It felt like the entire galaxy was stretched out before them, full of endless possibilities. Mark had once been uncertain about the future, but now he knew one thing for sure. No matter what came, he would face it with Lyra by his side. The day Mark had feared would come eventually had finally arrived. He stood at the center of the grand hall, looking around at the crowd of people who had gathered from both Earth and Lyra's planet. Today was the day they would formally announce the unification of their two worlds. There was a sense of anticipation in the air, but also a weight. This was not just a ceremony, it was the beginning of something that would change the course of history. The future of two worlds was at stake. Lyra stood beside him, her presence radiating calm and confidence. She had been the driving force behind the efforts to bring their people together, and now it was Mark's turn to do his part. He knew this was not the time for hesitation. Lyra had trusted him, and now he needed to show her and everyone else that he was ready to stand by her side. The audience before them was a mixture of humans and aliens, representatives from every corner of the galaxy who had come to witness this historic moment. Mark could see the skepticism in some of their eyes, but there was also hope. The unity of their two worlds was not an easy thing to accept, and not everyone believed it could work. But Mark had seen the possibility, and he knew Lyra believed in it more than anyone else. As the ceremony began, Lyra stepped forward and addressed the crowd. Her voice was steady, powerful, and filled with conviction. "Today marks the beginning of a new era," she said, her words echoing through the hall. "An era where our worlds will no longer be divided by the stars that separate us, but united by the same hope for peace and understanding. We stand here today, not as separate people, but as one. Together, we can build a future that will last for generations to come." The crowd listened in silence, their eyes fixed on Lyra. Mark stood beside her, feeling the weight of her words. He could see the determination in her face, and he knew she believed every word she spoke. She had worked tirelessly for this moment, and now it was their turn to make it a reality. After a few moments, Lyra turned to Mark, her gaze softening. "Now we will take the final step together," she said. Mark stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. The moment had come. The promise he had made to her all those years ago was no longer just a dream, it was a reality. He looked out at the audience, feeling the eyes of thousands of people on him, waiting for him to speak. He took a deep breath and began. "When I first met Lyra, I never could have imagined how much our worlds would change. What started as a simple promise has become something much greater. Together, we have worked to bring peace, unity, and hope to our people. We've faced challenges, but we've never given up on each other. And today, as we stand here, I know that this is just the beginning." Mark paused for a moment, looking over at Lyra, who smiled at him. Her smile gave him the courage he needed to continue. "I promised Lyra 5 years ago that we would marry," Mark said, his voice steady, "and I stand here today, keeping that promise. But this marriage is not just about two people. It's about two worlds, two peoples, coming together to create something stronger than the sum of its parts. Together we will build a future where no one has to fight for their place, where we can all live in peace." The room was silent as Mark finished speaking. For a moment he felt unsure of what would come next. But then he felt Lyra's hand on his, steadying him. She gave him a small nod as if to say, "You've done it." Lyra stepped forward and took Mark's hand in hers. Together they faced the crowd, their fingers intertwined. The two worlds were coming together, not just as allies, but as partners, as equals. "We stand here today," Lyra said, "not just as leaders of our worlds, but as partners, bound by our promise to each other and to all of you. We will lead with love, understanding, and a commitment to building a future where everyone has a place. This is our commitment to you, and we ask that you stand with us." The audience erupted into applause, their cheers echoing through the hall. Mark and Lyra stood side by side, their hands still clasped together. They had done it. They had made it through the doubts, the challenges, and the fears. Together, they had brought two worlds into harmony. As the ceremony continued, Mark looked out at the crowd, feeling a sense of peace settle over him. He had once feared the unknown, but now he saw only possibilities. He was no longer afraid of the future, because he knew that no matter what came, he would face it with Lyra by his side. After the ceremony, Mark and Lyra stood together on a balcony overlooking the city. The stars above them shone brightly, and the world around them seemed to hum with new energy. The future they had dreamed of was finally within their grasp. Lyra turned to Mark and smiled. "We've done it, Mark. We've created something that will last." Mark nodded, his heart full. "Yes, we have. Together, we've built something strong." They stood there, side by side, looking out at the stars. The universe seemed to open up before them, filled with endless possibilities. And Mark knew, as long as they were together, there was nothing they couldn't face.